Isn't it a blessing to get together on Easter? You know, as a pastor and pastors all over the world today, they want everything to go right in their churches, You want everything to go perfect. It never goes perfect. There are always things that happen, and you look back and you think, wow, I can't believe that happened. I know this morning, Bruce Abbott, you may know that they have some cows over next to the Catholic Church, St. Bede's, in a field, and he got a call that somebody over there said the cows decided to come to church this morning, right? They got loose, and so there's a bunch of cows wandering all over the churchyard over there. I thought that's kind of good. We had a great early morning service. It was 41 degrees, but that wasn't so bad. And we had a wonderful breakfast together, and it was a great getting up morning with the birds were singing, and it was just a terrific day. One of the things Steve works as office administrator, does a great job with the bulletins every week, and he always checks 3 or 4 times because I like to change my idea for my sermon. Okay, I never can get it down. Well, he printed it on Thursday, and on Saturday I decided, no, I don't want to do it. So, if there is a change in anything that you're expecting, that's okay, because the Holy Spirit sometimes adjusts. What we want is to follow His leading. Today, I want to talk about moving from doubt to faith. Okay, and there's the story of Thomas, and it happens after the resurrection, but it's very much connected to it. And so I want to talk today about this story with Thomas. It's John 20, beginning of verse 24, it goes like this. Now, Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. And so he wasn't, when Jesus was resurrected, he appeared to some people. He didn't appear. Thomas wasn't there. He missed it. And so the other disciples told him, we've seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the nail marks on his hands and put my finger in where the nails were and put my hand in his side, I'm not going to believe it. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. And though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. And then he said to Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe. And Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. And Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. And Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written so that you may and I may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. And so we're going to look at one of the people that most that have some understanding of Christianity have heard the story of doubting Thomas. So I want to look at Thomas. I want to ask some questions about Thomas, and I think get to some understanding. You might think to yourself, well, I'm not doubting. I'm here today, and I believe in the resurrection. I believe in Jesus rising from the dead, and I'm going to be frank here. So I thought I believed in the resurrection too, and then I had a tremendous loss in my life. My 12-year-old son got cancer, and in the midst of his struggle with that, my wife's parents were in a car accident, and they died when my son was in ICU within a couple of weeks of each other, and then my son passed away 6 months later. And, I believed in the resurrection, but honestly, my faith in the resurrection wasn't as consoling and comforting and transforming as it should have been. And I had some doubts. I had some struggles. And so when I look at Thomas, and when we look at Thomas, if you ever had doubts in your life, if you've ever struggled with things and thought, I'm just not sure about something, well, Thomas was a good person to look to. Because here's a guy that went from not believing to 180 degrees change into calling Jesus my Lord and my God, which is a huge statement of faith. And so I want to look at how that process worked in his life and talk about how it could work in our lives. So first off, why was Thomas so skeptical? Why didn't he believe? Well, there might have been several reasons why he didn't believe. I know that they probably did not have Myers-Briggs tests back in the first century. Some of you may have taken one before, but when you take one, it tests, first of all, your personality and your temperament. Maybe his temperament was, the way they rate it in that scale, maybe he was more intuitive, more evidential than intuitive. Maybe he had to see it instead of just hear about it. Maybe he was a sensing person instead of a intuitive person. Maybe he was this kind of person that said, show me. He wouldn't believe it just because you told him. Everybody told him Jesus had risen. He kept hearing this from the other disciples, but he didn't see it. Maybe that's what you are. Maybe you're the kind of person that really likes to see it, to experience it yourself. Another reason that he might have been skeptical is because, everybody today, lives in a modern world, and sometimes we're skeptical of supernatural things. Because, you see things happening, there are reasons behind the scenes. There's usually scientific reasons why these things happen. Maybe he was skeptical about someone who is dead rising from the grave. Dead people don't rise again, except maybe in a zombie movie or something like that today. The idea of somebody that was dead coming back to life, that's maybe too hard for him to accept because he didn't see it. Or maybe it wasn't some intellectual thinking that lost his faith. Maybe it was his emotions. Maybe he was afraid. I've been around a lot of people as a pastor over years who have been going through the loss of their loved ones. And I've been there with people when they lost their loved ones and then when the loved ones got sicker and worse and worse. And, people go through these emotions. And I often find that when it gets to the last stages, and the doctors say this is all we can do, and sometimes somebody comes in and says, well, if they go to this other country and they take these methods, maybe this will save them. And the people that a lot of times are closest to the family member, they'll shake their head and they say no, because deep down they know that's really not going to work. And part of them is thinking, I've accepted this. I cannot not accept this because it hurts too much. And I'm afraid to believe again. Maybe when Thomas accepted that Jesus, his greatest mentor, his person he's been living with the last 2 years and following around for 3 years, and maybe he's thinking, now I finally accepted what's happened. I don't want to believe again because what if I'm disappointed again? And so maybe he's afraid to hope. He's afraid to even kind of think, well, maybe he's alive because he just doesn't want to have to go through all of it again. It just hurt too much. Start hoping again. Maybe, we don't know. But it's interesting to think about. So this is some of the reasons why he might have doubted. How did he move from not believing to believing? How did he go from, not believing at all to saying, my Lord and my God, which a Jewish person would never say that. They believed in one God, and that a person could become God was blasphemed. So to him go from not to doing it, how did he do it? Well, I'm going to talk about 4 reasons. First off, he listened to the eyewitnesses. In verses 19 through 24, he listened to the eyewitnesses. There was people who had appeared to the disciples when Thomas wasn't there, and a week later they showed up again, and they kept telling Thomas, this is what happened, this is what was going on, and they witnessed it. Last night I was watching this movie called The Greatest Story Ever Told. Okay, they were replaying it on television. And there's this one scene where Lazarus is risen from the dead, and when it happened, this one guy who basically didn't believe is so moved by it, he starts running around telling everybody, and they play the Hallelujah chorus while he's running around telling everybody, and it was just very inspiring, And so he heard these eyewitnesses, and the New Testament says there were 13 different eyewitness accounts of Jesus' being alive after the crucifixion. There were 4 appearances by Jesus to individuals, and there were 9 appearances to groups of people. And these were written down by the apostles and their associates. Okay, now, if you were in college a long time ago, or if you took a Bible class, or especially in a secular institution like colleges are, many years ago, they would tell you something like, well, these accounts are written down long time after it took place. But since then, there's been a ton of scholarship that talks about what we have in the New Testament is not written as myths. They're written as historical accounts. They're written as actual eyewitnesses to what's going on. And the way that it's written, it's just in historical times when you wrote a historical document, the way to vouch for its authenticity is you would have eyewitnesses that would point to what had happened. And so about 20 years after this was written, this experience happened, Jesus was resurrected, Paul wrote these words in 1 Corinthians 15. Paul says, "For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day, according to the Scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, that he appeared to more than 500 of brothers and sisters at the same time." It'd be hard to trick 500 people. Most of them are still living when he wrote this. Most of them were still alive. Some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me, also as to one abnormally born. So here Paul is saying, all of us we've had these experiences. We actually seen them. Now, there's some history that you learn because you go through it. And the older you live, the more historical things you can remember. For instance, I'm old, so I can remember lots of things that I actually saw. I remember, believe it or not, I can remember as a baby watching people land on the moon. I wasn't a baby, I was young. I remember the space shuttle when it blew up. I remember 9/11, the trade centers. There's lots of things about history that I didn't actually see. I never personally witnessed World War II or World War I or the Civil War. I didn't see any of those things. But how do I know that they happened? We believe because we have eyewitness testimony of people who were written it down by credible historical authors. And so you don't have what Thomas had, which is you could talk to the eyewitnesses, but we have the written documents of the eyewitnesses. We have lots of documents. And so I suggest if you're thinking, I'm just not sure I believe, I challenge you to start reading the accounts. Read the accounts in the Gospels. Look at them and just, think, well, does this read like it really happened? Does it read like these are eyewitness accounts? And, take time to do that in your own life if you're having some doubts. Second, as Thomas went to examine all this, he came to discover that Jesus was actually reaching out to him as much as he was reaching out to Jesus. Thomas kept saying, I won't believe, I won't believe. People would tell him, well, listen, Jesus is alive. He said, well, I got to see it. I'm not going to believe unless I touch the scars, unless I see the wounds. And then Jesus shows up, and Jesus says, Thomas, touch the wounds, see the scars. And I don't know what all was going through Thomas's mind at that. Part of it, he probably was really embarrassed that he'd been saying that. And he probably is thinking, how did he know that I said that? How did he know? Well, he knew because Jesus, knows everything. And he knows your heart. He knows what's going on in your life. He knows what your thoughts are. He knew what I was struggling with my son and with what was going on in my life. He understands what my heart was experiencing. He knows whatever you're thinking, and he's working behind the scenes in ways that you don't now see. But one day, I pray that you will. There's this great writer, C.S. Lewis, and he wrote a whole bunch of great books, and one of the series was the Narnia Chronicles, and one of the stories, it was called A Horse and His Boy. And in this story, it's about this boy named Shasta, and he is in a far-off country, and he hears about this wonderful land of Narnia, and so he tries to escape where he is and go to Narnia, and that is what the whole story is about. And it's a long story, and he goes through an adventure, and he goes through lots of hard things along the adventure. And one day, he is having a dream. And in his dream, there is this voice that speaks to him. It's this Lion King character. And the boy starts talking with this voice in his dream. And at one point, he says to the voice, he says, well, don't you think it's been such bad luck that I keep running into so many lions? Says Shasta. There was only one lion, says the voice. And Shasta says, what do you mean? And the voice says, I was the lion. I was the lion that forced you to join with Erebus. I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead. I was the lion who drove the jackals from you as you slept. I was the lion who gave the horses the new strength of fear, the last mile, so that you could reach King Loon in time. And I was the lion you do not remember at all, who pushed the boat in which you lay a child near death, as a child near death, so that it came to shore where a man was waiting at midnight to receive you. And in this story, C.S. Lewis was recounting his own experience of coming to God. He was an atheist, and he realized as he started thinking about God and reading about God and studying about God, that God was actually pursuing him. And so you might be thinking, I don't know about my faith, it's just not where it should be. But you know that God is right now, knows that, and he's pursuing you. And the reason you're here today is part of that pursuit. And the reason perhaps that I changed the message on Saturday to this is because he needed you to hear that. 3, for Thomas, he came to understand the meaning of Jesus' wounds in a deeper way. He says, Jesus says, I want you to touch, you want to touch him, you can touch him, and then he doesn't. Why doesn't he? Well, I think he was embarrassed by it. And I think it shocked him that he sees the wounds of Jesus in his side and his hands. I mean, think about this. When we think of heaven, you don't usually think of having wounds in heaven. We're taught by preachers and pastors and teachers in the Bible that you get a new body, which is good news, isn't it? Because some of us are ready to trade the one we got in. I went to the doctor a couple of weeks ago, and he said, "Well, how you doing?" I said, "Doctor, my right leg feels great, but everything else hurts." He said, I want my whole body to feel like my right leg." There are things that we wish that we look different on our bodies, or we wish we had a new one. And so this idea of keeping your scars, why did Jesus keep the scars? Well, 2 Corinthians 4:17 says this about our scars: "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." And we look at the difficulties that we have, the problems that we're going through and have gone through, the scars that we have, and we often think, why did I have to go through that? Or why did that happen? Or that's not fair. And Jesus Christ says, look at my wounds. He might say to you, look at your wounds. Maybe the things that have happened to you have a message to teach you. And so the mistakes that you've made and the troubles you've been through are not things that have gone wrong in your life. They're things that are directing you in your life to bring you to where you are now. I love movies and great stories, and the best movies have happy endings, okay? I mean, a movie with an unhappy ending, it might make $2 million. A movie with a happy ending, $300 million, okay? And you can have a movie that has bad thing, bad thing, bad thing, bad thing, bad thing, happy ending. And if it's unexpected, that makes it even better. But my favorite kind of movie is when there are bad things, but then at the end, everything fits together and makes sense in a way that nobody thought about it at the time. Now, there's a movie that I've watched, and probably nobody's seen it, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. All right, it's an old movie, okay, but it's a movie called Signs. Okay, it's got Mel Gibson in it, and he's the protagonist. And all through the movie, things go wrong in his life. His wife is killed in a tragic car accident. His brother's baseball career is a flop. His little son has terrible asthma. He's always on the verge of having an asthma attack. His little girl is obsessive compulsive, and every time she takes a drink of water, she thinks it tastes bad, and so there's always glasses of water all over the house. And then aliens invade the world. Okay. Bad thing, bad thing, bad thing, bad thing, bad thing, bad thing, and then it looks like absolute disaster. It's a dark movie. Everybody's losing their faith, but then at the end, everything fits. And joy hits you in the stomach because you realize that all those bad things were meant for a purpose. And it all fits together. And it actually redeems the people in the movie. The bad things make the joy possible. What if that's true? I think it is in your life, in my life. And what Thomas saw as a bad thing was Jesus being crucified. Jesus left the marks because he wanted to show him, no, this isn't a bad thing. This is a great thing. Because of Jesus' death, it gives you new life. It gives us new life. 4. The fourth thing that led to Thomas coming to faith was he dropped his conditions. Earlier he said, I'm not going to believe. No, I have to see it. I have to touch it. I'm not going to believe unless I touch it. Yeah, are you one of those people that says the same thing over and over again? I know some of you are. And if you live with somebody long enough, they have to hear you a lot. So Thomas kept saying, I got to believe, I got to see it, I got to see it. But eventually he didn't. He dropped his conditions. He got it. He said, it makes sense now. He says, I didn't understand it before, but now I understand it. We are not guaranteed tomorrow. And so, wherever you are in your life, you may sometimes have some things you think, well, if I just get that straightened out, then I'm going to follow and believe all the way. Don't put it off. Here's a story that's going on in the golf world. I love golf, okay? And there's this young man, okay, and his name is Sam Bennett. I got a picture of him, and he is right now he's in the top 5 on the run-in to win the Masters. He's an amateur. He's in college. One of the youngest has ever done this, and he plays for Texas A&M, and he's always had this close relationship with his dad. I got a picture with his dad. His dad helped him along the way, encouraged him as a golfer, supported him. Well, his dad got the same thing actually my dad got. He got early onset dementia. Okay, at 45, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, which is what my father got. And so he deteriorated pretty quickly over a few years, and he got to where he didn't know anybody. And before he got so bad, he wrote something on a piece of paper and gave it to his son in his handwriting. And what he wrote is this. It says, "Don't wait to do something." Well, his son kept that piece of paper, and he took it and made a stencil out of it, and he took it to a tattoo artist, and they tattooed it on his arm. I got a picture here. That's what his dad wrote. Don't wait to do something. And now he has it on his arm, and he goes through life with that in his dad's handwriting. Are there things in your life that you haven't gotten right with God? Do you know that Jesus rose from the dead? Do you know it emotionally, intellectually? The doubts that you've had, have you faced those? Have you asked, do you know that Jesus has been pursuing you? And that even those terrible things that have happened in your life, God can use to do great things? If you listen to the eyewitnesses of Scripture, realize that He's seeking you, understanding the meaning of His wounds, I pray that you'll drop your conditions. When I'm getting to, I'm here. Stop doubting. Believe. It's Easter. Jesus is here.